Hi, and welcome to the Kubernetes podcast from Google. I am your host, Abdel Seguiwach.
And I'm Caslin Fields.
This week, I had the opportunity to speak to our colleague, Nick Eberts. Nick is a product manager on GKE in the platform engineering space. We discussed what platform engineering is, how different or similar it is to DevOps, and what is Nick up to these days.
But first, let's get to the news. Starting July 24th, 2023, the official Kubernetes binaries will be distributed using a CDN. The domain dl.k8s.io, which hosts these binaries and serves more than 5 petabytes of traffic per month, will adopt Fastly as its content delivery network. So if your company uses some IP filtering, you may have trouble with this, and you should look into updating your infrastructure. Keep in mind that July 24th is a cutoff date. Past that date, the IPs will change and there will be no dual running period.
Red Hat announced OpenShift Service Mesh version 2.4. The new version is based on Istio 1.16 and Kiali 1.65. This new version introduced a set of new features like cluster-wide topology, search manager integration, and external authorization, all becoming generally available. OpenShift Service Mesh is included in all subscription levels of the OpenShift platform.
Amazon Web Services introduced AWS Signer, a container image signing service which uses their key management system. The new service uses Notation, a CLI of the open source Notary project from the CNCF. For verification of image signature and policy management, customers can use Kyverno or bring their own admission controllers.
Registration is now open for KubeCon and Cloud Native Con North America for 2023. The event will take place in Chicago, Illinois on November 6 to 9. If you haven't registered but you plan to attend, we recommend that you do so now, especially since early bird tickets are available only until July 7th. Also, make sure to book your hotel as soon as possible. They are selling out fast.
The registration is also open for KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, and Open Source Summit in China. The event will take place September 26th to 28th in Shanghai. Early bird tickets are available until August 9th.
Have you heard of SBOM, or Software Bill of Material? Enter KBOM, or Kubernetes Bill of Materials. KSOC Labs, the San Francisco-based firm, open-sourced the command line interface and the standard for generating a bill of material for Kubernetes. The JSON specifications gives operators and security teams insights into their clusters, especially workloads, vulnerability in images, third-party customization and CRDs, service mesh, and object versions. It's compatible with Kubernetes 1.19+ and works on most major cloud providers.
The CNCF has released a new blog by Kubernetes 1.26 release lead and friend of the podcast, Leonard Pelke, titled Version After Version, How the Open Source Project Kubernetes Releases Its Software. The article goes into detail on how the Kubernetes community is structured, how Kubernetes enhancement proposals work, and what goes into releasing new versions of the software. It's a great detailed write-up for the curious among you or those looking to get involved with the project. And that's the news.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Kubernetes podcast by Google. I'm your host, Abdel Seguiwach, and I'm here with
Nick Eberts.
How are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
Good. So we are actually recording this in Atlanta.
Yeah, we're in my hometown, Hotlanta. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I spent a couple of days here. I'm attending DevNexus, and Nick was so generous to invite me on the weekend. I had a really fantastic weekend. Last Sunday.
Yeah, it was a good time. We had Abdel up. We showed him some Southern hospitality, fed him some foods, gave him some drinks, and sent him on his way.
It was amazing.
I actually recall, though, I think my daughter was kind of whooping your butt a little bit on some Switch.
We were playing on the Switch. We played Mario Kart and we played some sort of soccer game.
Yeah.
And yeah, she was beating me.
Yeah. She was really adamant about talking trash too.
Yeah, the trash talk was real.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had so much fun. It was great. Yeah, and we had a chat actually over the weekend about the topic that we're going to cover today, which is platform engineering.
That's right.
This whole thing started with a tweet where I wrote like something around the lines of, is platform engineering just a solution to the complexity of Kubernetes? And then you replied with something, and then it was like, if we only had a podcast to talk about this.
That's right.
And that's how you get yourself invited to this show.
Yeah.
All right. So
subtle hint.
Yeah. before we get ahead of ourselves, let's get to know you. So who you are, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I am, Nick Eberts, kind of rolling with two jobs right now, half product manager, outbound product manager working with the GKE team. And then the other half of my role is focused on being an app ecosystem specialist. I've been using Kubernetes and working with customers to help them adopt Kubernetes since .7, way back when me and Eddie Viabla, shout out to that dude, another Googler, we were both at Microsoft, probably the first couple of people rolling Kubernetes on top of Azure VMs, which is treacherous. But anyway, yeah. So I've been in the space for a while, working with lots and lots of customers. I feel like I've seen platform engineering being born out of Kubernetes for the past, half a decade. So
yeah. And so, as you said, this whole platform engineering as a buzzword, whatever you want to call it, have been around for a while. But I don't know about you, but one of the things that attracted the most my attention in the last maybe 6 months is this tweet, which is like they pay for it. It's a promoted tweet by I think the people behind PlatformCon, if I'm not mistaken.
Also owners of a product that may or may not provide platform as a service.
Yes. And so the tweet is basically like a graveyard picture and like a bunch of people around it, and it says DevOps is dead, right? So do you think DevOps is dead?
I mean, there's no such thing as bad press, right? So
yeah, of course.
We understand why that was done. No, I mean, it just depends on how in your head you define DevOps. And I feel like DevOps in general has been defined super loosely over its existence, right? Lots of people have different takes. Lots of vendors are selling DevOps, which is hilarious. But DevOps to me is more like a philosophy, right? It's a state of mind. And I think a lot of the philosophy just remains to be applied, automate things, ship things faster. All the parts of DevOps that we know and we talk about don't go away with a platform engineering sort of conversation replacing them. It's just where those human beings work might change, right?
Yeah.
And I do think it's a spectrum. So if your org is centralized and you have a lot of users that have different expectations for their compute systems, they're doing a bunch of different distributed systems, maybe batch, maybe web services, you're probably going to have a more centralized platform, right? And so maybe you're not going to have DevOps folks necessarily living on each of those teams, but it may be more cost effective for you to centralize that talent to build a platform.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So it just depends a lot on, Conway's law prevails.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So you said something interesting, and I think it's one of these things that makes DevOps really hard to define. You said it's a philosophical question. And as far as I know, like tech people are really bad with philosophy, right? We define things. Because we're more on the implementation side really than the sort of philosophical research, creation side of things. Case in point, the company that we acquired, Dora, that was a research company.
Yeah.
And their job was trying to bring like a scientific methodology into trying to understand how DevOps is used by organizations and companies and try to kind of provide some guidance. But to people like you and me, people who are on the ground implementing things, like thinking about DevOps from a philosophical point of view, it's kind of hard. Because how do you, as you said, it's a spectrum. So what does it mean, a spectrum? Tech people like implementing stuff. And that's one of the reasons why most of the time when you see like a DevOps job, it's usually just a set of tools. Do you know Kubernetes? Do you know CI/CD? Do you know this and this and that, right?
Right.
So I think it's one of the reasons why it's a highly debated topic in general in the industry, because we cannot define what it is. It really depends on which company, what the company wants to do, how is it organized, etc. Right?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Dora is a good example where, if you look at the indicators and the solutions, I guess, that Dora would recommend, there are always these capabilities, right? They measure these capabilities and the effects that these capabilities have on the speed with which a company can deliver software.
Yeah.
And the capabilities don't really change when you're talking about platform engineering or DevOps, where you've just got, you have a operations person right next to your developer and implementing that same thing, right? So you have a DevOps engineer who's in charge of setting up CI/CD for his small dev team, or you have a massive platform team that sets up patterns of CI/CD for the bespoke business units that consume the product. It's still, the bottlenecks are still being addressed if the bottlenecks are indeed technology, which often they're not, but yeah.
Yeah, most of the time they're not.
Yeah.
All right, so that's DevOps. Then how would you define what people today refer to as platform engineering? What do you think people think of when they say, oh, we are doing platform engineering?
First off, super early term. I think I feel like I've been doing platform engineering for, like I said, 5, 6, 7 years, maybe even longer if you consider pre-Kubernetes, Linux distributed system work on other cloud providers. But I think that the term is sort of being set right now. I remember first hearing it being like just used prolifically at, I think it was KubeCon Valencia. It's probably the first time I was like, oh, everyone's talking about platform engineering.
Yeah.
And then at KubeCon Detroit, like quadruple so. There was 15 talks about platform engineering. And I think a lot of the sort of hype around it or the buzz around it is kind of wrapped into this notion of GitOps, where you're defining all of your configurations centrally and creating infrastructure and clusters and configuration that's sort of immutable that then pushes out and propagates to your fleets of clusters. But so platform engineering for me, though, my take on it is it's an acknowledgement that maybe not every end user of your container platform needs to know Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, maybe you're still running Mesos or some other container orchestrator, but not everybody needs to know it, right?
Yeah.
But there are some things they do need to know. And so it's creating an abstraction that sort of removes the cognitive overhead of being a developer who has to maintain knowledge over deployments and stateful stats and horizontal pod autoscalers and all of that configuration. And so platform engineering is just this idea that you're going to improve the developer experience of the end users of your platform so that they don't need to understand all of the complexities of the underlying infrastructure.
Sure. So there are a bunch of things you said there that I think we need to unpack. Do you think, first question, do you think that platform engineering is really specific to Kubernetes? Because you mostly mentioned Kubernetes stuff, right? Like what if you don't run on Kubernetes? What if you run on, VMs?
Yeah, I don't think it's specific to Kubernetes, though it's the place that I see it most often.
Yeah.
I'm also biased.
Of course.
Because that's where I spend most of my time. But no, I definitely don't think it's specific to Kubernetes. I mean, there's been platforms around before we decided to use containers.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's why I was asking, it was probably born from the complexity of Kubernetes to a large extent, but it's probably not specific to Kubernetes. Although maybe the people who are out there talking about it are people coming from cloud native and Kubernetes space. So you would associate it directly to Kubernetes.
Yeah, I think we have some confirmation bias because you and I both spend a lot of time in the Kubernetes space.
Correct.
But I do think that a lot of this is born out of that cloud native CNCF space. That said, I mean, whether it was called platform engineering 6 years ago when everyone was just rolling Helm charts, right? It's the same thing. They had these, you built these sort of templates of golden paths, and you could have maybe considered that like one of the first attempt at a platform on top of Kubernetes back in the day. And still people are using it now,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that you mentioned, which I think is interesting, is the GitOps model, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that have been around for a while. It's not new. Mm-hmm. Like doing things the GitOps way, or the Git way, as some people would refer to it, have been also around for a while. Do you think it's more specific, more important in the platform engineering space, or is it just like an implementation detail? Because I think about it as an implementation detail. Yeah,
so I don't know if, again, we're getting into jargon, and we live and die by it in the tech industry, but GitOps, right? A lot of people will assume that GitOps is always this pull model in which you have a bunch of daemons running across your clusters or orchestrators, pulling configuration and then making stuff happen. But it could be a push model too. I mean, when I think of GitOps, I just think you make a change in Git, and that change is then reflected across a number of computers.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
This is the basic definition, right?
Right. It is an implementation detail, but I do think that, one way to approach platform building, and this is the approach I've been sort of a fan of for a while, is and this is specific to Kubernetes. I mean, I'm a GKE PM half the time. So is this idea that you're going to create fungible clusters, this idea that the underlying clusters in your quote unquote fleet of Kubernetes, right? I mean, they just don't have a personality. I like to call them clusters without a personality, right? So their personality is just defined in this config somewhere, and it's centralized. And if you do it right, you don't fall into the trap of like care and feeding and maintaining a particular cluster, it's very much that old school
pets versus cattle.
Yeah, you're just rip and replace as you need, and it keeps you out of trouble when there are certain configuration choices in any cloud provider that are immutable for a cluster. So like if you need to put a new cluster in, the fact that you've codified everything, whether it's GitOps, I guess, or just Bash, the idea is that you can just quickly rebuild that cluster with the one change you need to make and then deprovision the old one. And I think that's kind of key to the underlying infrastructure of a platform.
I see. Okay. Well, that's one component of it, I think, right? The other component would be the abstraction layer that platform engineering is supposed to provide the end developers. You talked earlier about the developer experience.
Yeah.
So the way platform engineering is marketed, especially by the companies that want to make money out of this, is, okay, we're just going to give your developers this beautiful interface, this beautiful GUI. So they don't really have to, as you said earlier, know the implementation detail of Kubernetes. They don't have to know namespaces, what's or not. They can even go a step further and use Kubernetes to define the application dependencies. So use Kubernetes to provision a database, use Kubernetes to provision like a messaging queue or a bucket, whatever, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about that, like that abstraction layer? And that's the chat we had over the weekend. Where I told you, I don't want to talk more than you, but like,
okay.
DevOps was supposed to solve the ops versus build model, right? And then I was saying maybe this platform engineering is just going back to that. Essentially, build a wall, which is the interface that just shield the implementation detail away from the developers. But you had a different opinion about it.
Yeah, so like two things there. To your latter point about the wall, I think as a platform engineer, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're providing your end users more than just a UI for provisioning and for updating apps and provisioning environments. You need to provide them a UI or an experience, rather. It doesn't have to be a UI. It could be a set of CLI tools. It just depends on the kind of the characteristics of the people that you're working with. Some people don't need everything to be put into a nice, clean UI. They're happy with just like a tool chain that works, right? So, but the point is that you need to provide them an ability to become aware of how the new thing that they're shipping into their environments, their life cycles, is behaving, right? They need that observability coming right back at them. So they can't be disconnected. I was actually listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember which podcast it was, but Charity Majors was on it. And one of the points that the host and she were making was this idea that like the long tail right now in the shipping software quickly is actually merge request time. It's not the time to deploy. It's not the time to write the code. It's the time to get two people or one person to be like, yeah, that's good. Push it into production.
Code reviews basically.
Right. But so like I think part of providing a good experience is a way to create broader visibility of those merge requests and then the subsequent push after that, the telemetry that's coming out of the system as it's being rolled out. That's super important. And that I think removes the wall to some degree because they can't just ship some code and then go home. And I don't think they want to, right? Like listen, I've been a developer before, right? Like if I'm shipping code right now and I'm waiting like 48 hours for a merge request and then it's getting pushed into production maybe 3-4 days later and something breaks, I was never more aware of the context of that code that I wrote than the minute that I issued that merge request, right? All the time after that is just, it's like degradation of my awareness of that particular code set. And I would never be more capable of fixing it quicker than that moment in time when I issued that merge request. So we need to shorten up the time it takes to get from code written, merge request approved into production.
Okay, I never really thought about it that way. That's interesting to say, or what you mentioned is the long tail is the merge request, is the code review part. But while you were talking, I was thinking in my head, the way we do it at Google is we have this thing called readability. So for a certain programming language, you can become a readability expert. Essentially, you become a reviewer. But that means that you as a software engineer, you have been trained to withhold a certain standards. And if everybody is trained on the same standards, then code reviews becomes easier because you as a trained person, you know what to look at when you are looking at a merge request or whatever we call it internally, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that that's something that not a lot of companies, it feels to me like something that it should be implementable by everybody?
Oh man, it's hard. It's hard because, I mean, to our credit at Google, I mean, we operate as one company mostly. I mean, we do have our acquisitions and things like that, but we operate as one company. We use one tool chain.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been working with enterprise customers long enough to know that that's not typically how they function.
Yeah,
there may as well be like 15 different, 20 different, 100 different organizations within one.
Yeah.
And so to get that mind share to establish these like frameworks and common understanding is much more difficult with companies that are buying, acquiring other companies and selling them off. It's a more difficult problem for them, I think.
Yeah. That sounds like a topic we should probably explore in this show, like the whole engineering culture and how it impacts productivity. And case in points, how long it takes for code to be reviewed is a major topic that I think is probably not maybe overlooked. Maybe other people are covering this topic, but like I've never really had discussions around this with my customers when I was working with customers.
No, I mean, I think it's worth, when you get in those conversations, just asking some probing questions so we get some better feedback from what's actually happening outside of Google so we can learn a little bit more about the other ways things are getting done. You're also talking about this idea of creating the abstraction, right, over Kubernetes or over whatever the computers are and the APIs are that you're abstracting, right? And I mean, you can go all the way back to, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. I'm bad with dates, but do you remember Service Broker?
Yeah.
Yeah, Service Broker was a pass at trying to create. Yeah, it was a pass at trying to create that interface that allowed you to go into this portal, so to say, and like pick your WYSIWYG buttons of an application and have it assembled.
Yeah.
And it wasn't successful. It wasn't successful because I part of the reason I think it wasn't successful is because it actually wrote a little bit in the face of infrastructure as code.
Yeah.
And so that I think is part of the challenge I see is the conflict with the approach that you need to have a GUI for your platform engineering DevX.
Yeah.
Like you need to be able to turn that configuration into code somewhere, right? It can't just be like I come into work and I assemble these clicks and assemble an application and it can't be reproduced.
Yeah, what you see is what you get. Yeah. You have to have them, how that thing have been assembled, like the origin story essentially.
A state store somewhere that tells me what it actually is in production, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we covered a lot of topics, but I still want to go back to that point of, to have like a mental model. We have the old school way, which is the ops versus build with the wall in the middle.
Yeah.
We try to solve it with DevOps, you just get these two functions, roles, whatever teams to be one. Yeah. And effectively, a lot of times when you talk to people around DevOps specifically, they say, oh, our DevOps team own and operate the entire stack. So they own the VMs, they own the databases, they own everything, right? And so
they're effectively a mini platform team at that point.
Pretty much. That's actually a very valid point of putting it, right?
Yeah.
So then we're coming to this world of platform engineering. And although the biased person I am around anything that is, as jargon, as you said earlier, or buzzwords or whatever, I see value in the sense of if your goal is to take these people who are doing repetitive work across multiple organizations, put them together, have them build something that can provide a developer experience to everybody else. That's how I think about platform engineering.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, there's no wrong thing here, right? The DevOps model isn't wrong. Platform engineering model, if you're being hard and fast about it, isn't wrong. It's more to do with the maturity in the organization that you have, I think. And so like a lot of folks that were starting up with Kubernetes or starting up in the cloud, they had these sort of like bespoke teams that were all doing their own infrastructure and kind of owning the stack. And out of that, I think, was born DevOps, right? Because they were able to move fast. They were able to get over like the hump of traditional on-prem application. I need a VM and I'm going to put a request in for it and I might get it next week, right? They were able to get past that kind of stuff. But now you have the same organizations that now have some of them 10, 12, 15 different business units doing that. Like that's not efficient.
Yeah.
It's not efficient from a human being, like engineering hour perspective.
Yeah.
But it's also not efficient from a computer perspective.
Yeah.
One of the things that really gets my ire up is this idea that we're going to treat Kubernetes like some orchestrator for homogeneous workloads. I keep on seeing it. I know that there's reasons, like some things are sensitive. There's business reasons why that may be the way that you go. But it was not built or intended to be an orchestrator of homogeneous workloads. The whole point is to have heterogeneous workloads that have different characteristics so you can get better bin packing and, use less computers to serve the same work. Have less of an environmental impact to serve the same work. Like, that's the point. And so when your organization is mature and you start to build out that platform that stretches beyond just different bespoke business units, you start to gain the abilities of more efficiently bin packing and just driving costs down if you do it right, I think.
Yeah, I like that perspective, actually. I think that that's something that 99% of the tech writing that people do on the internet are opinions, obviously. So
for sure.
And probably 90% of these 99% are people who are somehow mad at everything. Like, we are not doing cloud because X. We are not doing Kubernetes because X. We are not doing service mesh because X. And it always seems like it's a black and white type.
We've moved back on-prem because of X.
Exactly. And I think that when you read these articles, you are always, I cannot prevent myself from thinking, well, you are missing the point. When somebody says we don't use Kubernetes because of X, it's probably what you described. You're trying to make Kubernetes fit your workloads, or you're trying to make your workloads fit Kubernetes, not the other way around. So it's the homogeneous versus heterogeneous discussion, right?
Yeah.
Or we're not doing cloud because X, well, you have 10 virtual machines. Going to cloud is not going to be cost efficient for you, right?
Yeah.
So I think that what I'm trying to get at is a lot of people, they lash out at a tool or a way of doing things or a certain platform or certain something, but they're missing the point of how that thing is supposed to be used.
No, yeah, I think, do you know Darren Shepard?
Yeah.
So I was talking with him about this about a month ago, and very smart dude. He's built a bunch of really interesting things that a lot of people use today. So good for him for Rancher and all the great things that he did over there, and he's continuing to do. But his point with Kubernetes is he always feels like it's too complicated.
Sure.
And
I'm not denying that.
Right. And my counterpoint to him was that Kubernetes isn't too complicated. The workloads that are in the world today are complicated.
Yeah.
Kubernetes API is as complicated as you need it to be.
Yeah.
If applications can fit in a nice pivotal Cloud Foundry PaaS model, and that would have served the needs of 50, 60, 70% of the workloads out there, it would be here and be super successful today, but it didn't.
Sure.
And containers kind of become sort of the next to lowest abstraction that can service a decent swath of workloads. There's still a bunch of stuff that shouldn't be in containers, right?
For sure.
I'm looking at you, Windows. Unless you're, of course, converting it to .NET on Linux, but that's besides the point. Yeah. But it's as complicated as it needs to be. And I think it's really powerful to have an API that can both serve legacy, stateful Java applications, and then serve cloud native, I have them doing quotations, cloud native applications that are microservices based, that are running asynchronous patterns with RabbitMQ or whatever running in your cluster. It's great that there's an API out there that does both of those things.
Yeah.
And so Kubernetes, I think, ends up becoming the de facto choice for a lot of our customers and a lot of people out there running applications on computers, just because of its ability to have a wide net of applications that it can support.
Yeah, definitely.
And so yes, it could be easier, but that's greenfield applications. That's a very small percent of what is running the world that we live today.
Yes. And as I always like to say, applications doesn't live in a vacuum, because when Kubernetes came out and when people started using it, it was mostly, hey, build a container, deploy a container here, create a load balancer, happy days, Hello World example, whatever. But then where is your database? Where is your messaging queue? Where is your login and monitoring system? All of those stuff had to catch up. And now we're getting to the point you're describing. It's a pretty flexible API that can do a lot of things, including stateful workloads, including batch workloads,
right?
Including, these days, AI and ML workloads, which is a huge one, right? So it's getting to a point where Kubernetes, I think, in my opinion, it's over the hype period. It's getting to the maturity period now. It is a mature product. And excuse me for saying this, but if you have a problem with using Kubernetes, you have a problem. It's your problem. It's not the tool.
I don't think it's a problem or no problem. If you're applications can run on something else at a higher abstraction and it fits your cost profile, do it.
Yeah, so be it, yeah.
Right? That's okay.
Yeah.
Like no one says everything has to run in Kubernetes. If you are running one service, you should probably look at something else, right?
Yeah, probably.
You know what I mean?
If it's your personal blog.
Yeah, you probably don't. Or even if it's just something that's making a lot of money for you, that's customer facing, but if it's just one service, it's got one characteristic, it's super bursty, and you don't really see a need to start to bring in more things around that service, then it wouldn't make sense to learn Kubernetes. You might want to look at something like Cloud Run or any kind of functions as a service bit to kind of...
Yeah, container class, basically, a container as a service.
Yeah, anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most fascinating time to be in cloud is now, because it's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of things that are progressing at some at a steady pace. Some are just popping up every week like a JavaScript framework. Just look at the CNCF landscape. It's growing like crazy every day. Now, if you look at the blog, every other week, there is a project which is accepted to the incubating phase.
Sure.
Every other week, there is a project that is graduating. It's getting wild, essentially. So
competition's good, though.
That's true.
I like the competition. I like the... I mean, I think that's one... We're getting way off topic, and I'm sorry, but one of my favorite parts about Kubernetes is that it's sort of... Oh, God, this term. It democratized software a little bit, right? I'm sorry for using that term. But it made it more accessible for smaller shops to build and ship things. And that's why back in the day, I think Helm, and still today, is successful, right? So you have this common format, you package it up, and then you can ship it around to anybody who's got a Kubernetes API. Doesn't matter what cloud provider they're on most of the time. Yeah,
there's a whole discussion about, is Kubernetes going to give you the multi-cloud the way people want to think it will give you multi-cloud, right?
Give you like 80% of multi-cloud.
Very much. But that's a topic for another show. Well, we covered on a lot of things, and I want to just bring the discussion back to platform engineering a little bit and try to wrap up. So most of the time when I ask this question, people hate me, is where do you see this thing going? What's the future? Platform engineering.
I mean, I think it's going to blow up. It's going to be strong. It's going to be strong because I think that the maturity of customers using Kubernetes, the percentage of mature customers using Kubernetes is increasing.
Yes.
And these orgs have complex org charts, all filled with applications that have different requirements.
Yeah.
And you're either going to build kind of a platform abstraction on top of your cloud providers or on-prem that's unique for each of those things and doesn't share the compute layer on the bottom.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but there's obviously inefficiencies there. Or you're going to look for a way to have kind of like a cohesive infrastructure layer underneath so that you can get better bin packing and scaling and drive costs down, better negotiation power with cloud providers. Yeah. So I think it's only going to become more prolific over time.
Yeah, there is actually a point. I think I want to touch on this point. We haven't discussed. We talked about complex org charts and how that drives inefficiencies in general, and what you just described. Platform engineering could essentially fix that, or could help you fix that. One of the issues that will remain is chargeback, because in complex organizations, every business unit has its own budget. And one of the challenges that a platform engineering team inside a big, complex organization would have to push for platform engineering, push for their platform to be used, is, well, how do you do chargeback? How do you charge me for what I consume out of this platform? And that kind of created a whole genre of FinOps, right? Financial operations.
Yeah.
So I think that also has to get to like a mature point at some point. Like, how do you doing chargeback in Kubernetes is extremely difficult.
It's getting easier. Well, it's getting easier in certain places.
We're not going to say what those places are.
No, that's exactly right. And I think it's why so many folks end up with that single business unit tenancy model in which every business unit, every unit that they want to charge back gets its own cluster.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's up to the ecosystem and the providers out there to help make that problem more easily solved so that it doesn't need to be a single tenant cluster and that you can just break those walls down, get the chargeback you need, again, by treating the clusters like this fungible fleet of workers, right? You don't really want to get to know them. You shouldn't care which cluster you're on.
Yeah.
It should just be about whether or not your work is running and how much it costs.
Yeah. So we'll see how it develops in that sense. And I think we're going to see what the trends are in 2 weeks. We're going to KubeCon.
Oh, yeah.
This episode is going to air after KubeCon, but we're going to be in KubeCon. And, every year KubeCon has one trendy thing.
Yeah.
Valencia was eBPF and platform engineering.
Yeah.
Detroit was all about software supply chain security.
Yeah.
So we're going to see what this edition is going to bring.
It's going to be AI, though, isn't it?
It has to be.
It's going to be AI.
That's what's going on.
God, so I'm getting old. I'm 42 years old, and I'm starting to forget things. So much so that there was a group email that went around in the past week, and someone discovered, so we have this internal way at Google you can create bots, right?
Yeah.
So someone discovered a bot called NickGPT, and I couldn't remember if I made it or not.
Okay.
That's where my brain's at right now, man.
Right,
I was like, did I make that? And I was just waiting for someone to claim it. And I don't think anyone's claimed it yet. So it might have been me, but I'm not quite sure.
So what does it do?
It's a shim on top of Bard.
Oh, okay. Sure. With the personality, I guess.
Yeah. It's a little bit pessimistic, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I've seen on Twitter last week this kubectl-AI. Somebody wrote like a kubectl wrapper.
Yeah.
Which uses ChatGPT to get like, hey, kubectl, create a deployment with 3 replicas, and then it just like prompts you the YAML file. And then it tries to apply it to the cluster. I haven't tried it yet.
No, yeah. Someone posted a screenshot of it this morning. And of course, me being the smart aleck that I am, I was like, awesome. Way to take it back to the 2016 Kubernetes demo. But yeah, so, ChatGPT, just capable of making the right decisions to create a 3 replica deployment of Nginx with an ingress in front, just from like one command.
Sure, you could just create a deployment with kubectl and then describe it with the -o YAMLs. What's the difference?
Right. I think they still have generators too, right? They didn't completely get rid of those. You could just generate that config.
Oh, yeah, you could, yeah.
That's how I passed all my CCAD exams back in the day.
Yeah, tips if you are doing the exam. The generator command is very useful.
Yeah.
All right, man, this was fantastic. I really had a good time having a conversation. I always enjoy talking to you.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I'm honored to be on here. I probably could have done better, but I'll take it.
No, we try to make the show as light as possible. The whole point is to bring perspectives of people into a topic, right? And we're not trying to push for a specific agenda or anything. We're just having a friendly chat. This basically would be the same thing with a beer over a fireside, right?
If we do it again, I think that we need to do it at my house.
Yeah, then we have to have a camera and everything, and maybe we should shoot it because...
Oh, God, are we going to do a fireside chat?
Yeah, but your house, it's beautiful. We have to take pictures. It cannot just be audio because it's not going to be immersive enough.
Oh, yeah. You hear that, Sundar? I'm going to be doing the fireside chats next year, sir.
All right, fireside chat in next place in Atlanta, Georgia.
All right.
All right, well, thank you very much. Any last words?
No.
I think I'll try to get some resources from you to add them to the show notes if people want to expand their knowledge of this topic.
Yeah, I would tell you to come join me at KubeCon in a couple of weeks, but you're not going to hear this until after KubeCon, so...
We're going to take a picture and post it to Twitter.
Okay.
So
sweet.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for that conversation, Abdel. It was very much a conversation. I feel like you all had a really good time talking to each other. You covered so much.
I was in Atlanta when we had that interview, and we have 2 offices in Atlanta. There is the new one and there is the old one, which is not closed yet, but it's pretty much not used. So I was sitting there because it was quiet, and I just we booked a room and we sit there and we were, because I was in his place on the weekend. So this was continuous of conversation we had over the weekend, really.
And like I said, you covered so many different topics. You started out with DevOps, and that is a area that is near and dear to my heart. So let's start with that. I loved how Nick talked about DevOps as being a philosophy. Kind of my way of thinking about DevOps versus platform engineering is similar to what you all were saying, that DevOps is all about philosophy and it's really about the culture. Whereas platform engineering, I think Nick said in the interview that platform engineering is about improving user experience. It's about specific tasks and kind of work that you do that you could apply DevOps concepts to.
Yes.
But all in the name of user experience. And that's kind of how I see it.
Or precisely developer experience, right? Because that's essentially what platform engineering is trying to optimize
developer
for,
experience,
right?
Yeah. Because a lot of the folks that I talk to, folks that care about Kubernetes traditionally have been folks who are serving developers.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's kind of where this comes from.
Yeah. It's interesting that Nix has this very clear way of distinguishing the reason I mentioned DevOps in the first place is because we all have seen on Twitter this like very famous promoted ad. Which
you mentioned it. Yeah.
And then, so I was trying to pull him toward like talking about that specifically because in my head, every single time I read anything about platform engineering, it always tries to compare it to DevOps, which in my opinion, there is no way to compare those two things. There's like distinct things trying to solve distinct specific set of problems.
Apples and oranges.
Exactly.
Both fruit.
So they can be complementary. You can use them together, but you don't have to, right? So, I mean, in a way, if you really think about it, if I am a developer and I am using a cloud platform, could we argue that the cloud platform is doing platform engineering for me because they're providing me with self-service and managed services? Yes.
I think so, yeah.
Right? So I use the interface on API to provision stuff, and I don't have to worry too much about where my database is. So yes, that's platform engineering.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting, I think, kind of way to frame it, this conversation between platform engineering and DevOps. Because sometimes folks come up to me with this kind of trying to compare the two, like you were talking about. It's like, are DevOps things going to be replaced by platform engineer things? And I think, some of them might be because those DevOps things were trying to get at what platform engineering is trying to get at to begin with. But DevOps, I think, will still continue as its own kind of area as well.
Yeah. And also another thing, because DevOps also has a business component to it, right?
Yeah.
Because in the methodology, or specifically in the DORA methodology, which is kind of one of the way to assess your DevOps implementation or your DevOps impact on the business, it has those business metrics that you can track. Platform engineering is just, you could technically measure developer experience, but I feel like DevOps and DORA give you like a framework to do that. While platform engineering tells you, you should have a platform which is self-service.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes with platform engineering, well, how do I measure developer velocity, right? How do I measure the developer experience in general? DevX is just a random topic that is it's very difficult to measure if you don't have metrics for it. So as you said, I think DevOps will stick around, and platform engineering is just one implementation on one set of implementation, one way of looking at it. Maybe down the line, something else will pop up.
It's one piece of that pie. Like if you look at a DORA report, there's definitely stuff in there that applies to platform engineering, but there's more beyond that as well.
Exactly.
One thing that you talked about quite a bit was how we improve developer processes, because this is all about improving developer experience. So it's about improving the day-to-day lives of developers. And one thing that really stood out to me was when you talked about trying to standardize processes of like how people do code reviews and get software made. I found that really interesting because we come from a Kubernetes world. So CI/CD is certainly an important part of the world of Kubernetes, though it's kind of outside of Kubernetes itself. But these kind of developer workflows, Kubernetes only touches a small part of it. So it goes beyond that.
Yeah. While we were talking, you reminded me of a conversation I remember having a few years back with a friend who used to work at Google as a software engineer and then quit. And I think within a month we had the conversation, and this person was so shocked with the wild west of how people do stuff outside. Obviously, Google has its own way of doing things, and it's all about developer experience, and it's all about you as a developer. You come in and you're productive from day one, right? You know how code reviews work. You know how CI/CD work. You don't care how it works. It just works for you. You know how code versioning work. And then, they quit the company and they went somewhere to work with like GitOps and CI/CD and stuff like that. And they were like, oh, do I have to actually figure out CI/CD myself? I don't even know how it works, right? So it's definitely like the developer experience, the developer workflow is really at the core of what platform engineering is all about, is how do you provide people with standardized tooling, but also standardized processes, standardized way of doing things like code reviews. You'll be surprised how many companies doesn't do code reviews still.
Yeah. And it relates to the number one question that I get from customers, which is, how does everybody else do this?
Oh, yeah.
That's what everybody always wants to know. Because there are so many different ways to do things. And when you're starting up, you do whatever works. And then as you get larger and larger, there's so many different groups within the company that are just doing that all the time, where they're creating their own processes and ways of doing things. And some companies do more to streamline that into a single process than others. So you end up with a huge variety of ways that things could be done. Thus, the answer is always, it depends.
It depends, yeah. So today I was on the flight to Amsterdam. I was reading an article that was shared by Richard on Twitter. And we can share it in the show notes. But the article, I don't remember the exact title, but it's something around the lines of, you should focus more on the platform part of engineering when you're talking about platform engineering, focus more on the platform side rather than the engineering side. And, there was a breakdown of how this could be implemented. So the person who wrote this article works for a company that had to go through this transformation. And one of the things that I like there is when you are trying to implement or you're trying to answer the question of how others are doing it, well, involve your developers, right? Have them be a stakeholder that can tell you and give you feedback and try to incorporate their feedback into the platform you're building rather than, deciding on their behalf, essentially.
And there's a DevOpsy thing there of trying to bring different skill sets together to make something better for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, the article even went further to say, have a PM, hire a product manager to build the internal platform, hire somebody who would be tasked with designing and deciding and getting the shareholders together to, it comes natural to us as people working for cloud providers. I think this is not only Google, all the companies have some sort of PM role, but I don't think a lot of people really think about it. I think people think about product owners or like Scrum Masters, which are totally different. A PM is its own, thing. It's like somebody who owns the end-to-end life cycle of whatever that platform is trying to build and able to pull everybody in and get feedback of everybody.
I feel like it keeps coming back to that tools versus culture element of DevOps.
Definitely.
And also kind of applies to platform engineering here too, of course, of what are the platforms that you're going to use. Nick mentioned in the interview that a lot of the times when you see a DevOps job, it's listing a whole bunch of tools that you'll need to know. But then the concept is all about culture, bringing people together and making things work better together. So it's kind of this intersection of those two over and over again.
Yeah. I have my own beef with the term DevOps engineers.
Yeah. Don't we all?
I have tried to understand it over and over. I cannot, for the sake of me, know what does it mean when you say DevOps engineer. Because most of the roles is just like, you need to know Jenkins and Terraform and stuff like that, right?
However, when you say platform engineer, that means something specific to me. You're creating a platform to serve developers.
I guess the term platform engineer makes more sense for me.
Yeah, it does for me at least. Because if you say a DevOps engineer, I'm like, okay, are they your chief culture officer? Are they going around to different teams to like figure out what's wrong?
Yeah, are they doing full stack, which there are probably 7 engineers in the world that know how to do full stack.
Mm-hmm.
Are they
full stack?
Yeah, but I mean full stack is not only like front end, back end. It's also, your run environment and your CI/CD and everything. Like they own everything.
Yeah, it's kind of a catch-all term, so it could mean really anything.
And there are actually companies that does this, by the way. There are companies that intentionally will keep teams separate from each other and have everybody reinvent the wheel and build their own infrastructure and their own security and their own everything. And there are arguments to be made.
DevSecOps.
Don't even give me started on that one. Because it sounds like whenever we don't know what to do with something, we just add security to it because suddenly it would make sense.
Yeah. I do find the term platform engineer very helpful. Like if I'm talking to a user, a company, and they say, oh, you're talking to our platform engineering team. I'm like, that sounds like the right people. I know I have some idea of what you're working on. So I find it useful in that respect.
Yeah, it makes more sense, yes.
Yeah. So I think it's a good term.
Yes.
I think platform engineering will continue to grow, and I'm excited about it. And I'm also still excited about DevOps. And I hope that there will be fewer job titles with DevOps in the name.
I hope so as well. I hope we stop inventing new titles because that seems like what we're doing.
Unless you want to invent your own fun title, you're welcome to do that. But companies, maybe tone it down.
Yeah, we just calm down a little bit. I would be. Here's my hot take. I would be okay with going back to system administrator. I don't know what's wrong with system administrator.
I do love system administrator. I love that title.
I was a system administrator myself. I am okay with that term. Let's just call them sysadmins. That's fine.
I did a survey of folks at one point when I was talking to a lot of different companies, and no one ever wanted to call themselves an infra person, an ops person. They didn't want to say that. They wanted to say platform engineering or they wanted to say developer. They didn't want to use the terms of ops or infrastructure, which I found very interesting.
Because it sounds reductive in a way?
I don't know. It was just the result of that one poll that I did, which, maybe not statistically significant. I would have to do some analysis on that. I did have a good number of respondents, but still.
That's pretty interesting, actually. That's a pretty interesting one.
Yeah. I think there's something to explore there.
Yeah, probably.
So thank you so much, Abdel. That was a great conversation, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of another episode. If you enjoyed this show, please help us spread the word and tell a friend. If you have any feedback for us, you can find us on Twitter at KubernetesPod or reach us by email at kubernetespodcast@google.com. You can also check out the website at kubernetespodcast.com, where you will find transcripts and show notes and links to subscribe. Please consider rating us in your podcast player so we can help more people find and enjoy the show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.